The front door opened and closed. My father's heavy footsteps approached the kitchen. "Margaret, Ilara, what's going on?" He looked from my mother's livid face to my flower-covered, resolute one. "Ask your daughter," my mother seethed, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Ask her about the little business she started, using our home as a soup kitchen." My father's weary eyes settled on me. "Ilara." I took a deep breath. "I baked bread today, Dad. Grandma Agnes's recipe, and I gave it away to people who needed it. People who are lonely or struggling or who just appreciated the gesture. They came to the porch. They took some bread. Some left a donation. It was beautiful." I saw a flicker in his eyes, a memory of his mother, of a kitchen that was warm and lived in, not a showpiece. But it was quickly extinguished by the weight of my mother's glare. "Beautiful," she spat. "It's a liability, it's an invasion of privacy, it's an embarrassment. Arthur told me he saw a post online, some ridiculous hashtag, 'You're making a spectacle of our family.'" "No," I said, my voice low and steady. "You made a spectacle of our family when you decided one of its members was disposable. I'm just picking up the pieces you left behind and building something new with them." The silence that followed was electric. I had never spoken to her like that. I had never directly challenged the narrative. My father sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "Ilara, your mother is right. This isn't appropriate. This house, it's not a public venue. You can't just have people coming and going." "Why not?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What is this house for if not to be lived in, to host people, or is it only for hosting the right kind of people?" My mother's face was pale with fury. "It stops. Now, you will take down that post. You will not bake another loaf in this kitchen. This ends here." I looked at her, at the unyielding wall of her social ambition, and I knew then that there was no bridging the chasm between us. Our hungers were fundamentally different. She hungered for status, for control, for a flawless exterior. I hungered for connection, for purpose, for the messy, beautiful truth of a life lived with heart. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. "What did you say to me?" My mother's voice was dangerously soft. I said no. I picked up the donation jar. It was heavy, full of the trust of strangers. "This isn't your decision to make. This is my life, and I'm not stopping." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them standing there amidst the evidence of my rebellion. I didn't go to my room. I went to the attic. I needed to see the old oven, to touch the cold, solid iron, to remind myself of the legacy I was fighting for. As I sat there in the dusty silence, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lonely at the Top. "I drove by today," it read. "I saw the people on your porch. I didn't stop. I was too ashamed, I think. But I went home and I cooked a proper meal for myself for the first time in years. I ate it at my table, not at my desk. It felt like a victory, thank you." I read the message twice, tears pricking my eyes. This was the hunger I was feeding, not just for bread, but for self-worth, for the courage to claim a space in one's own life. My family's rejection was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but this message, this growing community, was a warm, expanding light in my chest. The battle lines were drawn, not just in my home, but within myself. And I knew with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating which side I was on. The bakery would continue. The war for my own soul had already been won. The one for my grandmother's oven, however, was just beginning. The Cold War began at dawn. I came downstairs to find the kitchen sanitized. My bag of flour was gone. The jar of sourdough starter, my living, breathing connection to Grandma Agnes, had vanished from the counter. The mixing bowls were stacked with sterile precision, and the scent of industrial-grade bleach clawed at the air, erasing the comforting ghost of baked bread. My heart plummeted. For a moment, I felt like a child again, my small creations deemed messy and inconvenient, swept away by an unseen, disapproving hand. Panic fluttered in my throat. Without the starter, it was over. The Black Sheep Bakery would die before it had truly lived. But the feeling lasted only a second. The memory of the nurse's grateful wave, the weight of the donation jar, the words of lonely at the top, they had forged a new resilience in me. My mother had declared war with cleaning supplies. It was almost laughable. I didn't rage, I didn't confront her. I simply began my search, my movements methodical and calm. I checked every cabinet, every pantry shelf. Nothing. Then my eyes fell on the large stainless steel trash can. My stomach twisted. I lifted the lid. There, nestled among coffee grounds and eggshells, was my starter. The glass jar was tipped on its side, the bubbly, pale goo seeping into the trash. A deliberate act of destruction. A cold fury, clean and sharp, replaced the panic. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was an attempt to kill something beautiful, something alive. She hadn't just thrown away flour and water. She had thrown away my grandmother's legacy, my newfound purpose, the hope I was offering to strangers. I carefully retrieved the jar. Most of it was salvageable. I scraped the uncontaminated portion into a clean bowl. It was wounded, but it was alive. It would survive, just like me. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. My mother stood in the doorway, already dressed for the day, her expression one of cool satisfaction. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence. I held up the bowl with the rescued starter. "It's resilient," I said, my voice even. "Just like the woman who created it, you can't kill it with trash." Her mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure frustration. She had expected tears, a scene. She got quiet defiance. She turned on her heel and left without another word. The battle for the kitchen was lost for the day, but the war was far from over. I took the starter, my recipe box, and the donation jar, and I retreated to the one place she never went, the attic. It was time to bring Grandma Agnes's throne back to life. The rest of the morning was a symphony of dust and determination. I cleared a space around the old cast-iron oven, wiping down decades of grime. I found the electrical outlet, a relic itself, and with a prayer to any god that listens to rebellious bakers, I plugged it in. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint orange glow appeared behind the ancient dials, and a low, comforting hum filled the attic. It worked. It was hot, cramped, and far from ideal. But it was mine. It was a sanctuary. My mother could lock me out of the kitchen, but she couldn't lock me out of my own inheritance. I mixed a new batch of dough on a makeshift table of stacked crates, using flour I'd smuggled from the grocery store. The process was slower, more arduous, but it felt sacred. Kneading the dough in the dusty attic light, I felt a connection to my grandmother that was more potent than ever. She had baked through hardships I could only imagine. I could certainly bake through a little familial disapproval. I posted an update on the forum from my attic sanctuary. Title: The bakery has moved up in the world to the attic. A small attempt was made to shut down the Black Sheep bakery today. But black sheep are stubborn, and old ovens have long memories. The bakery is now officially operating from a secret, secure location, the attic. The spirit of Grandma Agnes is alive and well, and her sourdough is currently proofing. Same time, same place. The front porch, 12:30 p.m. Today's special, Resilience Loaf. The response was a digital roar of support. Offers to buy me a new oven, to protest my mother's actions, to supply me with endless flour. The community had my back. At 12:30, I carried the loaf downstairs. It was slightly misshapen, baked in a pan I'd found in the attic, but its crust was a deep, honest brown, and it smelled divine. I set it on the porch table, the jar beside it. The procession began. It was larger than the day before. People came not just for bread, but for the story. They looked at the house with new eyes, knowing a rebellion was brewing within its walls. An older woman, her eyes crinkled with kindness, pressed a jar of homemade blackberry jam into my hands. "For the next batch," she whispered. A young man in a delivery uniform left a $20 bill. "Keep fighting the good fight," he said with a grin. They weren't just taking bread, they were joining the cause. The Black Sheep Bakery was no longer just a place to get food. It was a symbol. I was collecting the empty board when a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled up. A man in an impeccably tailored suit got out. He looked out of place on our leafy, suburban street, an embodiment of corporate precision. He was older, with a stern, weathered face that spoke of long hours and heavy decisions. He walked toward the porch, his steps measured. He didn't look like the others. He looked like he belonged at my family's dinner table. "Can I help you?" I asked, my guard instantly up. He stopped at the foot of the steps, his gaze taking in the simple setup, the now empty bread board, the donation jar. Then his eyes met mine. They were a startlingly clear blue and held a depth of weariness I recognized. "I was told I could find a decent loaf of bread here," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "You're a little late," I said, crossing my arms. "It's all gone." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Pity," he hesitated, then gestured toward the house. "This is quite a place to run a pop-up bakery." "It has its challenges," I replied, my tone dry. He nodded, his gaze drifting to the upstairs window, the one that led to the attic. "I imagine it does." He looked back at me, and his expression was unreadable. "The resilience loaf, was it?" "That's the one." He stood there for a moment longer, as if deciding something. Then he gave a short, sharp nod. "I'll try to be earlier tomorrow." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing on the porch, utterly bewildered. He didn't get back in. Instead, he just stood there, leaning against the driver's side door, looking at the house, at the neighborhood, with an expression of profound, aching loneliness. And then I knew. The tailored suit, the air of quiet authority, the deep-seated weariness. Lonely at the top, had come to see the bakery for himself. I went inside, my mind reeling. The battle lines were blurring. The enemy wasn't just my family anymore. It was a system, a way of thinking that created loneliness on both sides of the dining room table. My mother, in her desperate pursuit of perfection, was just as isolated as the man in the suit outside. We were all, in our own ways, hungry. I climbed the stairs back to the attic, the heart of my rebellion. The air was still warm from the oven, smelling of yeast and victory. I had saved the starter. I had baked the bread. I had fed the people. And I had just realized that the hunger I was trying to soothe existed in places I had never expected. The leaven was in the dough, and it was making everything, including my understanding of this war, rise in ways I could never have anticipated. The man in the suit, lonely at the top, whose name was Alistair Finch, became a silent fixture. The next day and the day after that, his black car would glide to a stop at 12:25 p.m. He never came to the porch with the others. He remained a respectful distance away, a spectator to the quiet ritual, always leaving just before the last slice was taken. He was studying the phenomenon of the Black Sheep Bakery, and perhaps, by extension, studying me. I didn't acknowledge him, and he didn't approach me again. It was a strange, unspoken truce. His presence was a constant reminder that my small rebellion was being observed from the highest echelons of our town's society, the very world my mother so desperately wanted to impress. Meanwhile, the bakery was evolving. Retired teacher Tom, whose name was Arthur, a kindly, gentle namesake to my brother, built and installed a beautiful, weatherproof cedar box on the porch with a hand-painted Black Sheep Bakery sign. Sarah, Midnight Baker, started leaving batches of her famous double chocolate brownies in the box before dawn. Green Thumb Gus's crate of vegetables appeared weekly, leading to new experimental loaves, zucchini bread, sun-dried tomato, and rosemary focaccia. The porch was no longer just a distribution point. It was a community pantry, a living, breathing entity that operated on an economy of trust and generosity. The donation jar consistently held more than enough to cover my costs, funding not just flour and yeast, but also little scholarship bags I started making, a loaf, some of Sarah's brownies, and a jar of soup, for those who messaged me saying they were too shy or too ashamed to come to the porch. I was no longer just a baker. I was a curator of kindness. And the town was talking. My mother, who lived and died by social perception, could feel the shift. Her friends, the ones she played bridge with and lunched with, stopped asking about Arthur's latest deal or Clara's charity work. Instead, they asked about *me*. "Margaret, we saw the most charming little bread box on your porch. Is it true your Alara is running that darling bakery? You must be so proud of her community spirit." Each word was a sweet, subtle poison to her. Proud. Of this. Of the unwashed masses traipsing up her manicured path. Of the scent of peasant food clinging to her prestigious address. She wore a rictus of a smile in public, but at home, the silence from her was arctic. The tension in the house was a sourdough starter of its own, bubbling and expanding, threatening to overflow its container. My father became a ghost, retreating to his study the moment he came home. Arthur and Clara avoided the house entirely. It was just me and my mother, two opposing forces in a cold, beautiful war zone. The breaking point came on Friday. I was in the attic, pulling a batch of cinnamon rolls, Sarah's recipe, my execution, from the oven when I heard the front door slam with such force it rattled the attic windows. Then my mother's voice, shrill and uncorked, shattered the quiet. "Elara, get down here this instant." I descended the stairs slowly, wiping my floury hands on my apron. She stood in the foyer, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. In her hand, she held her tablet, the screen displaying the local online society column, the Gilded Page. She thrust it at me. "Read it." The headline was, "The Rise of the Black Sheep, How One Woman's Solitary Dinner Spawned a Town's Sweetest Sensation." There was a picture of me, taken from the forum, smiling beside a loaf of bread. The article gushed. It talked about the failed family dinner, the inspired act of community building, the legacy of Grandma Agnes's love. It mentioned the stunning Victorian on Willow Lane and the steady stream of grateful residents. It quoted Lonely at the top, anonymously, of course, saying, "It's the most authentic thing to happen in this town in a decade." She's not just baking bread. She's rebuilding a sense of community we've all lost. It was a triumph. It was everything I could have wanted. And it was my mother's worst nightmare, printed for all her world to see. "Rebuilding community," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You are tearing this family apart. You have humiliated us. You have made us a laughingstock." "Are we laughing?" I asked quietly, looking at the photo in the article. "It looks to me like people are finally seeing this house for what it could be, a home, not a museum." "This is MY House," she screamed, the sound raw and ugly in the cavernous foyer. "I have spent my entire life building the reputation of this family. And you, with your flower and your pathetic little hobby, you are destroying it in a matter of weeks." "It was never a reputation built on anything real," I shot back, the composure I'd held for so long finally cracking. "It was built on exclusion, on pretending we're better than everyone else. Well, guess what, Mother? The people you look down on are the ones showing up every day. They're the ones who have my back. They're my family now." The word family hung between us, a weapon I had never dared to use. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something beyond anger. I saw a flash of devastating hurt. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, terrifying finality. "Get out." The words were quiet, flat. "What?" "Get out of my house," she repeated, each word a chip of ice. "You have chosen your new family. You have chosen to spit on everything I have worked for. So go to them. You are no longer welcome here." I stood there, stunned. I had expected fury, arguments, passive-aggressive maneuvers. I had not expected banishment. This was her nuclear option. She was calling my bluff, betting that without the house, without the kitchen, without the stage, my little rebellion would wither and die. I looked at her, at the immovable fortress of her will, and I knew, with a sickening lurch, that she was right. I couldn't bake in the attic if I didn't have a key to the front door. The Black Sheep Bakery, in its current form, was doomed. But as the initial shock receded, a strange calm settled over me. The dough of my life had been punched down. It was time for its final proof. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. I turned and walked back up the stairs. I didn't go to my room to pack a dramatic suitcase. I went to the attic. I unplugged Grandma Agnes's oven. I carefully packed the starter, the recipe box, the donation jar, and the few baking tools I had accumulated. I put them all in a cardboard box. I walked back downstairs, the box in my arms. My mother still stood in the foyer, her arms crossed, a statue of victory. I walked past her to the front door. I paused with my hand on the knob and looked back at her. "You're wrong, you know," I said, my voice not much more than a whisper. "I wasn't spitting on what you built. I was trying to build something better. Something that wouldn't leave anyone feeling the way you made me feel that night. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch into the afternoon sun. I was homeless. The bakery was technically homeless. I set the box down on the cedar bakery box and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but my purpose was crystalline. The proofing was over. It was time to bake in a new oven. I opened the forum and began to type. Title: The bakery is homeless, but the black sheep are herd. My family has evicted me. The Black Sheep Bakery can no longer operate from its original location. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. I need a new kitchen. I have an oven, but it needs a home. I have a purpose, and it needs a place to grow. The community we built is the real bakery. The bread was just the product. Who's got some space? I hit post. I leaned against the porch rail, the box of my life at my feet, and I waited. I had no plan, no safety net. I had only the faith I had placed in others, and the hope that they would, in turn, place their faith in me. I was no longer the woman excluded from dinner. I was the woman who had fed a town. And I was about to find out if that town would, in its own way, feed me. The final shape of the loaf was still unknown, but the ingredients, hope, resilience, and a stubborn belief in the power of a good, honest bake, were all there, waiting for the heat. The screen of my phone, pressed against my palm, felt like a dying ember. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows of me and my solitary cardboard box across the manicured lawn. The Grand Victorian stood behind me, a silent, imposing sentinel of a life I was no longer part of. Every nerve ending was raw, exposed to the chill of my mother's finality. I was adrift. Then my phone vibrated, once, then again, and then it didn't stop. It was a digital earthquake. The response to my post wasn't just a wave. It was a tsunami of solidarity. Offers flooded my inbox, a chaotic, beautiful torrent of solutions. Sarah, Midnight Baker, was the first. My kitchen is yours. It's small, but it's warm and the oven works. Come now. Author, retired teacher time. Asterisk, my garage is empty. We can wire it. We can build a proper kitchen. Say the word. Green canvas. I've got a shed out there. Solid roof, priority one. It's yours. And then, a message that made my breath catch. It was from Alasdair Finch. I have a commercial space, he wrote. A vacant ground floor unit on Main Street. It has industrial-grade electrical, plumbing, and a ventilation system. It's been empty for a year. I was waiting for the right tenant. Rent will be 1 loaf of sourdough per week paid in person. The key is under the mat. 217 Main Street. A commercial space, on Main Street, the heart of the town. It was an offer so grand, so unimaginable, it felt like a trick. But the gruff, no-nonsense tone of his message held no mockery. It was a statement of fact. He had seen the value of what I was building, and he was investing in it. Tears blurred my vision, hot and unchecked. They weren't tears of self-pity anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, humbling gratitude. My mother had cast me out, believing it would break me. Instead, it had connected me to my town in a way I could never have dreamed. I didn't go to Sarah's kitchen or Arthur's garage. With a heart pounding a wild, hopeful rhythm, I picked up my box and walked. It was only 10 blocks to Main Street. The box grew heavy, but the weight felt good, a tangible burden of my new future. Number 217 was a corner unit, with large, grimy windows that looked out onto the bustling street. I found the key, its cold metal a promise. The lock turned with a smooth, heavy click. The door swung open into a vast, empty space. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight. It smelled of old wood and possibility. It was perfect. A blank canvas. My new attic, my new home. I set my box down in the center of the empty room, the sound echoing. This was it. The Black Sheep Bakery had a permanent address. The next 72 hours were a blur of beautiful, chaotic labor. I didn't ask for help. It just arrived. Arthur showed up with a truckload of tools and 2 of his retired friends, a retired plumber and a retired electrician. Sarah arrived with a car full of baking supplies and a massive coffee urn. Gus brought sandwiches. People from the forum, faces I now recognized from the porch, drifted in and out, offering to sweep, to scrub windows, to build shelves. Alasdair Finch stopped by once, standing in the doorway for a few minutes, watching the hive of activity. He didn't say a word, just gave a curt nod of approval before disappearing back onto the sidewalk. We were a swarm of black sheep, building our own pasture. The sound of hammers and laughter, the smell of fresh paint and coffee filled the space. We built a counter from reclaimed wood. We installed a second-hand industrial sink. And in the place of honor against the back wall, we wired in Grandma Agnes's cast-iron oven. It looked small and quaint in the large space, but to me, it was the heart of the entire enterprise. The grand opening was not announced. It simply happened. On a bright Tuesday morning, I unlocked the door of 217 Main Street, turned the open sign around, and the scent of baking bread, the Resilience loaf, now our signature, wafted out onto the sidewalk. They came, not in a trickle but in a steady, joyful stream. The nurse, the elderly man, the young mother, the college student. They came and they brought their friends. The line stretched down the block. The Gilded Page ran a follow-up article, this time with a picture of the bustling bakery, the large window now proudly hand-painted with the Black Sheep Bakery Est, from a place of love. I was behind the counter, flour up to my elbows, smiling until my face ached. I was no longer just feeding people, I was employing them. Sarah was my head pastry chef. Arthur was our unofficial greeter and bookkeeper. We were a real business, a thriving, beating heart in the center of town. It was a month after the opening when the bell above the door chimed and the morning rush had died down. I looked up from wiping the counter. My mother stood there. She was alone. She looked smaller somehow, diminished outside the context of her own home. She wore a simple coat, not her usual furs. Her eyes, usually so sharp and assessing, were wide as they took in the bakery. The bustling activity, the warm light, the happy chatter of customers, the vibrant art on the walls, all created by local artists who now traded their work for bread. She looked lost. Our eyes met across the room. The noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. I saw her gaze sweep over the evidence of my success, my happiness, my community. I saw the rigid set of her shoulders, the proud lift of her chin, and the undeniable, devastating confusion in her eyes. She had thrown me out to kill this, and instead, she had forced it to blossom into something magnificent, something the whole town celebrated. She didn't say a word. She didn't order anything. She just stood there for a long, painful moment, a stranger in the kingdom I had built from her rejection. Then she turned and walked out, the bell chiming softly behind her. I expected to feel a surge of victory, of vindication, but I didn't. I felt a profound, aching sadness. The chasm between us was now a physical one, mapped by the streets of the town, and it felt wider and deeper than ever. Later that evening, as I was closing up, I found a small, discreet envelope that had been slipped under the door. There was no name. Inside, on my mother's heavy, monogrammed stationery, was a single sentence, written in her elegant, looping script. "The bread, it does smell like her." I held the paper, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't acceptance, but it was an acknowledgement, a crack in the fortress wall, a fragile, painful thread of connection to the one thing we both had truly loved, Grandma Agnes. I locked the door of the bakery and stood for a moment in the quiet, warm space. The finished loaf of my new life was out of the oven. It was not perfect. It was scarred from the scoring of hardship. Its shape was uniquely its own, and it was built from a recipe of rejection and resilience. But it was solid. It was nourishing. It was real. I had started with a solitary dinner, a cry of pain into the digital void. I had been given a key to an attic, then a key to a street. I had been fed by strangers and had, in turn, fed a town. The family I was born into had shrunk, but the family I had chosen had expanded to include the whole world. I turned off the lights, leaving the bakery in darkness, but the lingering scent of yeast and sugar and love remained, a permanent, gentle rebellion in the air. The talk of the town had quieted from scandal to simple, sweet fact. The Black Sheep Bakery was open, and I was finally, unquestionably, home. My family excluded me from dinner, so I stayed home and became the talk of the town. The scent of rosemary and roasted garlic usually felt like a warm embrace, a promise of laughter and shared stories. Tonight, It was a ghost that haunted the hollow spaces of our too-large house. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, my hand resting on the smooth, worn banister, listening to the clatter of pans and the muffled, excited voices from the kitchen. My mother's laugh, a high, tinkling sound I usually loved, now felt like a shard of glass in my heart. They were preparing for the annual summer solstice dinner. A tradition. The words were etched into the very foundation of our family, a ritual my grandmother had started and my mother had perfected. It was more than a meal. It was a performance, a display of familial perfection where every linen napkin, every piece of heirloom silverware, and every member of the family had a designated, unchangeable place. My place had always been to the right of my father, a spot I'd occupied for 24 years. Until this year. "Alara, darling, are you still mopping?" My mother's voice cut through my thoughts as she swept into the foyer, a vision in a silk dress the color of crushed violets. She didn't wait for an answer. "You know how it is. Arthur's parents are in town, and with him being a new partner at the firm, we simply can't have any distractions." Distractions. That's what I had become. My older brother, Arthur, the golden child, the successful corporate lawyer, had married Clara, a woman whose smile was as polished as her pedigree. Alara, the aspiring artist who painted with unconventional mediums and had the audacity to choose a modest studio apartment over a corporate career, was the distraction. My recent, quiet breakup with a man my mother had deemed suitable had been the final straw. I was no longer part of the curated display. "It's just one dinner, Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. "It's the dinner," she corrected, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, a silent critique of my paint-stained jeans and simple t-shirt. "And we need the table to look cohesive. You understand?" Oh, I understood. I understood that cohesion meant conformity. It meant no awkward questions about my hobby, no concerned glances when I discussed my upcoming small gallery showing, no subtle pity for my single status. I was a splash of the wrong color on my mother's meticulously painted canvas. "Of course," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I understand." She offered a thin, satisfied smile. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge. We should be back late." With a rustle of silk, she was gone, joining the chorus of voices in the kitchen. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the final preparations reached a fever pitch. I heard my father's deep, reassuring murmur, Arthur's pompous baritone, and Clara's tinkling laugh. I heard the clink of fine china being carefully packed into a hamper. They weren't just going to a restaurant. They were transporting the entire performance to a private room at the Gilded Swan, the most exclusive venue in town. A place I was no longer welcome to inhabit. The front door opened, releasing a wave of balmy summer air and the sound of cicadas. I retreated into the shadows of the living room, watching them go. My father didn't look back. Arthur was on his phone. Clara linked her arm through his. My mother, the conductor of this symphony of exclusion, gave the house one final, approving glance before the heavy oak door clicked shut. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical presence, thick and heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. The grand house, usually a source of comfort, felt like a gilded cage. The lingering scent of their dinner was a taunt. I was alone, purposely, calculatedly alone. Tears threatened, hot and sharp, but I blinked them back. Anger began to simmer, a slow, hot burn in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just about a dinner. It was an erasure, a quiet announcement that I no longer belonged to the core unit of my own family. I wandered into the vast, empty dining room. The long mahogany table, usually gleaming under the crystal chandelier, was bare. It was a stark, empty stage. This was where I was supposed to be, sitting in that empty chair, playing my part. But my chair wasn't just empty, it had been removed entirely. The symmetry was perfect without me. A reckless, defiant thought began to form in the silence. They told me to stay home. They left me with leftover pasta. They expected me to mope, to cry, to feel the sting of my irrelevance. What if I did? I marched into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I opened the fridge and stared at the plastic container of sad, congealed pasta. Then I slammed it shut. No, I would not eat their leftovers in my solitude. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. I wasn't going to call a friend for sympathy. I wasn't going to scroll through social media and torture myself with images of their perfect evening. I opened my delivery app. I bypassed the usual pizza and Chinese takeout. I typed in the name of the tiny, family-owned Italian place across town, the one my mother would never deign to order from because they used plastic containers instead of fine china. I ordered, not a single serving, but a feast. I ordered garlic bread dripping with butter, a caprese salad with tomatoes that tasted like sunshine, and a rich, decadent lasagna that promised comfort. I ordered a slice of tiramisu so large it was practically a declaration of independence. Then I did something else. I opened a new tab, a local community forum, a vibrant, chaotic digital town square where people posted everything from lost cats to recommendations for plumbers. I created a new post. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was I really going to do this? The image of my mother's dismissive smile flashed in my mind. I began to type. Title, Dining Solo Tonight. Anyone else been uninvited from their own life? My family just left for a fancy dinner. A big, important, traditional family dinner. The catch. They decided I was a distraction to the evening's aesthetic and left me at home. So I'm sitting in this big, empty house about to have a solo feast of my own. Here's to all the black sheep, the odd ones out, the distractions. Raise a garlic bread stick in solidarity. I'll be posting pictures of my decidedly non-fancy, but probably way more delicious, consolation dinner. Left behind, solo supper black sheep banquet. I hit post before I could lose my nerve. A strange sense of calm settled over me. The anger was still there, but it had been forged into a sharp, clear purpose. I was no longer just Alara, the excluded daughter. I was Alara, the architect of her own evening. When the doorbell rang, I paid the delivery man and carried the fragrant cardboard boxes into the dining room. I didn't go to the kitchen table. I went to the formal dining room. I cleared a space on the vast, empty mahogany surface. I laid out my feast on the bare wood, the steam from the lasagna fogging the polished surface. I got a single plate from the cabinet, a simple white one, not the gilded china they had taken. I poured myself a generous glass of red wine from a bottle my father had left uncorked on the counter. I took a picture. It was a perfect, almost artistic shot. The single plate of steaming lasagna, the glass of wine, the garlic bread, all isolated in a pool of light from the chandelier on the enormous, otherwise barren table. The emptiness around it told the whole story. I uploaded it to the forum post. Then I sat down in my father's chair, the head of the table, picked up my fork and took my first bite. It was glorious. It was messy. It was real. I took a sip of wine and opened the forum on my phone. Already there were notifications, a few likes, a comment. Oh, honey, I've been there. Your feast looks a million times better than any stuffy dinner. Enjoy your peace. Another one, asterisk, black sheep banquet. I love it. Ordering myself some tacos and joining you in spirit. A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time all evening. I was alone in the house, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. I was having a party of one, and to my surprise, the walls of this empty house were starting to feel less like a prison and more like the quiet, blank canvas of a painting I had only just begun to imagine. I had no idea that my small, defiant act was the first stroke of paint on that canvas, a stroke that would soon ripple through the entire town and redefine the very meaning of my family's name. The lasagna was a revelation. It wasn't just food. It was an act of rebellion, each rich, cheesy bite a defiance of the perfectly seared scallops and dainty asparagus spears I imagined on their plates at the Gilded Swan. The garlic bread was bold and unapologetic, its aroma clinging to the air, a stark contrast to the subtle, expensive perfumes that would have surrounded me. I ate slowly, savoring the solitude, the only sounds the soft scrape of my fork and the occasional buzz of my phone on the table. The forum post was taking on a life of its own. What had begun as a raw, impulsive cry into the void was now a gathering place. The comments were no longer just pity or simple solidarity. They were stories. "You've inspired me," wrote someone named Midnight Baker. "My book club forgot to tell me they moved the meeting. I'm now baking a triple chocolate cake I have no intention of sharing. Thinking of you." Another, retired teacher Tom, shared, "50 years ago, my family didn't approve of my fiancé. They held a holiday dinner without us. We've been married 48 years now. Their loss. Your courage reminds me of my Betty. Shine on, young lady." My small act of defiance was resonating. It was no longer just about my dinner. It was a flag for anyone who had ever felt the sting of exclusion, the quiet pain of being deemed not good enough for the family portrait. The Black Sheep banquet was trending within the local forum. People were posting pictures of their own solitary meals: a bowl of ramen, a beautifully arranged cheese plate, a pizza box proudly displayed on a lonely coffee table. They were joining me. A digital commune of the left behind, finding warmth in our shared, virtual company. I felt a strange, new power humming in my veins. This was more potent than any argument I could have had with my mother. This was connection. This was validation. As the evening wore on, a new idea began to form, sparked by a particular comment from a user named Lonely at the Top. "Wish I had your spirit," asterisk they'd written. "Sitting in my penthouse, staring at a $500 steak from the hotel downstairs. It's quiet, so quiet. At least your meal has heart." Heart, that was it. My family's dinner was all about appearance, a cold, polished performance. My makeshift banquet, born from hurt, was brimming with a messy, authentic heart, and people were hungry for it. I got up from the table, my wine glass in hand, and began to wander the silent house. I walked past the pristine living room, the grand piano no one played, the shelves filled with books chosen for the color of their spines. It was a museum, not a home. I found myself climbing the stairs, drawn to a part of the house I usually avoided, the attic. The door creaked open, releasing the familiar scent of dust and memories. It was a labyrinth of forgotten things, a chaotic jumble that was the complete opposite of the curated perfection downstairs. And in the far corner, under a draped white sheet that was gray with age, was my true rebellion, my grandmother's old baking oven. Agnes, my father's mother, had been a force of nature. She hadn't been a society wife. She had been a baker. Her kitchen, in the small house my father grew up in, had been the heart of the neighborhood, always smelling of yeast, cinnamon, and unconditional love. This oven, a massive, cast-iron beast, was her throne. When she passed, my mother had called it quaint and unsightly, banishing it to the attic to be replaced by a stainless steel monolith that had more settings but no soul. I pulled the sheet away, coughing slightly in the cloud of dust. I ran my hand over the cool, pitted iron. A memory, sharp and sweet, pierced through me. I was 6, standing on a stool, watching Grandma Agnes knead dough, her hands strong and sure. "The secret, my little Alara," she'd whispered, her voice warm as the oven's glow, "isn't in the recipe. It's in the love you knead into it. Food made with love, it doesn't just feed the body. It mends the spirit." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of clarity. This was my inheritance. Not the silver or the social standing, but this heavy, forgotten oven and the truth it represented. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my reverie. It was a direct message on the forum from Lonely at the Top. "I know this is strange, but your post, it felt like a lifeline. I run a company. I have everything you're supposed to want. And I've never felt more alone. Is it really that simple? Just ordering a pizza and saying to hell with them." I leaned against the old oven, its solid presence a comfort. I typed back, my fingers flying. "It's a start. It's about taking back the narrative. They left you out of their story, so you start writing your own. My version involved lasagna. Yours might involve that steak, eaten not in lonely silence, but with a good book or a terrible movie you love. Claim your space. It's yours." I hit send, my heart pounding. This was more than a conversation. It was an alchemy. I was transforming my own hurt into something that could, maybe, soothe another's. I looked from my phone to the oven, and the two ideas, the digital community and this physical relic of love, slammed together in my mind with the force of a lightning strike. What if I didn't just post about my solo dinner? What if I brought Grandma Agnes's spirit back to life? What if I used this oven, right here in this house from which I'd been excluded, to bake for the others? For the forgotten, the excluded, the ones dining solo not by choice, but by circumstance. The plan unfolded in my mind, fully formed and terrifyingly beautiful. I would bake. I would bake her famous sourdough, her plum tarts, her cinnamon rolls that were like biting into a cloud of sweetness. And I would give it away, not sell it. Give it. I would announce it on the forum. A pay-what-you-can, no-questions-asked bakery, run from my family's own kitchen. A place where the only requirement for entry was a hunger for something real. It was audacious. It was probably insane. My mother would have an aneurysm. A fierce, joyful determination ignited within me. I descended from the attic, no longer a ghost in my own home, but a woman with a mission. I spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen, not to my mother's sterile standards, but to the warm, functional chaos of a working bakery. I cleared the counters of decorative fruit bowls and useless ceramic roosters. I made space for flour and yeast. I found Grandma Agnes's old recipe box, tucked away in a drawer, its index cards stained with butter and sugar and memories. I held it to my chest, a tangible link to a woman who had understood that a family wasn't defined by a perfect dinner, but by the love shared around any table, no matter how humble. Downstairs, the grand dining room stood empty, a monument to exclusion. Up here, in the warm light of the kitchen, I was building a different kind of monument, one of inclusion. I heard the faint sound of a car door slamming outside, then another. They were back. The perfect family returning from their perfect evening. A flicker of the old anxiety returned, the fear of their judgment, the weight of their disappointment. But it was quickly extinguished by the new, steady flame inside me. Let them come. Let them see. I didn't retreat to my room. I didn't hide my project. I stood my ground in the kitchen, the recipe box in my hands, a dusting of attic grime on my jeans, and the scent of possibility, of yeast and sugar and rebellion, beginning to permeate the air. The performance was over for them. For me, the real work was just beginning. The hollow echo in the house was being filled, not with their empty chatter, but with the quiet, purposeful sound of a new dream rising. The key turned in the front door lock with a soft, definitive click. It was the sound of the real world intruding upon my nascent rebellion. I stood in the center of the kitchen, my back to the entrance, deliberately arranging Grandma Agnes's recipe cards on the now clear counter. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The scent of garlic and tomato from my solo feast still hung faintly in the air, a ghost of my defiance. "Elara, what are you still doing up?" My mother's voice was sharp, laced with the thin veneer of politeness she wore in public, now slightly frayed at the edges from wine and social exertion. I turned slowly. They were a tableau of polished success in the foyer. My father looked tired, already loosening his tie. Arthur was smirking, his phone glowing in his hand. Clara stood slightly apart, looking vaguely uncomfortable, and my mother, her eyes scanning the room, was a hawk searching for imperfection. Her gaze swept over me, my dusty jeans, the open recipe box, and landed on the single plate and wine glass I had left on the dining room table. A deliberate, stark reminder in the vast, empty space. "I was baking," I said, my voice calm. It wasn't a lie. I had been preparing. The act of reclaiming the kitchen, of unearthing the recipes, was a form of baking in spirit. Her eyes narrowed. "Baking, it's nearly midnight, and you've made a mess of my counters." She stepped into the kitchen, her high heels clicking a staccato rhythm of disapproval on the marble. She peered at the recipe cards. "What is all this? Agnes's old things. Really, Elara, must you drag out every relic?" "They're not relics," I said, a protective edge to my tone. "They're recipes." Arthur chuckled, not even looking up from his phone. "Going to open a bakery now, are we? A fitting career. Maybe you can supply pastries for Clara's charity luncheons." The condescension dripped from his words, meant to shrink my ambition into a quaint, harmless hobby. I didn't rise to the bait. I simply looked at my mother. I was uninvited from dinner, so I made my own, and I made a decision about what to do with my time. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't ask about my dinner. She didn't ask if I was okay. The reality of my evening, my feelings, were irrelevant. All that mattered was the disruption to her order. Just see that you clean this all up before you go to bed. I won't have the house smelling like a bakery in the morning. With that final, dismissive command, she swept out of the kitchen, herding the rest of the family with her. My father gave me a weary, almost apologetic glance before following. Arthur and Clara disappeared upstairs without another word. The confrontation was over. It was smaller, quieter than I had anticipated, but its message was clear. My rebellion was a minor nuisance, unworthy of serious attention. They hadn't even asked about the forum post. They lived in a world so insulated, the idea that my solitary dinner could ripple beyond these walls was inconceivable to them. Their indifference was more fuel for my fire. As the house settled into a silence punctuated by the distant sounds of showers running and doors closing, I got to work. I wasn't cleaning up. I was beginning. I found the sourdough starter in the back of the fridge, a relic I'd kept alive for years in my own apartment, a tiny piece of Grandma Agnes I'd smuggled into my independent life. It was a living thing, bubbling with potential. I brought it to room temperature, its faint, yeasty aroma a promise. Following her stained, handwritten instructions, I began to mix the flour and water. This wasn't like painting, where I could lose myself in chaotic splashes of color. This was a ritual, a science of patience. The dough was sticky and stubborn at first, resisting my efforts. But I remembered her hands, the way she'd fold and push, her strength a form of love. I needed my muscles aching, my mind emptying of everything but the rhythm of the motion. Fold, push, turn. Fold, push, turn. The anger, the hurt, the loneliness. I needed it all into the dough. It was my alchemy. Transforming the bitter ingredients of the evening into something that could nourish. Hours passed. The moon traced a path across the kitchen floor. I shaped the dough into a rough boule, scoring its top with a razor blade, a final, graceful signature. I placed it in a proofing basket, covered it with a clean cloth, and set it in the slightly warm oven to rise. It was vulnerable now, a sleeping promise. I finally went to bed as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, my body exhausted but my spirit thrumming with a strange, peaceful energy. I slept deeply, dreamlessly. When I awoke, the sun was high. The house was predictably empty. My family had long since departed for their respective days of important meetings and strategic lunches. I hurried downstairs, my heart in my throat. I opened the oven door. The dough had risen, a perfect, smooth dome, the scores I'd made now gaping slightly, ready to bloom in the heat. It was alive. It was time. I preheated the oven, the old beast groaning to life. While it heated, I took out my phone. The forum post from the night before had hundreds of comments and likes now. The Black Sheep banquet had taken on a life of its own. I created a new post, my fingers trembling with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Title: The Black Sheep Bakery First Loaf is Free. Last night you all gave me something I desperately needed, a sense of belonging. Today I want to give something back. My grandmother was a baker. Her food was made with love, and it had a way of mending broken spirits. In her honor, I'm starting something. Call it a pop-up, a pantry, a rebellion. The Black Sheep Bakery. I've just put the first loaf of sourdough in the oven. It's my grandmother's recipe. If you're hungry, for food, for connection, or just because you've ever felt like you didn't belong, this is for you. It's pay what you can, and that can be nothing at all. No questions asked. I'll be on the front porch at 12:30 p.m. First come, first served. 1214 Willow Lane. Don't ring the bell, just come and take a piece of something made with love. I included a picture of the raw, scored dough, ready for its transformation. The response was immediate, likes, hearts, shares. Comments flooded in. Is this for real? 1214, that's the big Victorian on the hill. The Black Sheep Bakery. I'm crying, I'll be there. Your family is going to lose their minds. That last one made me smile. Yes, they were. At 12:25, the oven timer dinged. I opened the door, and the scent that filled the kitchen was a time machine. It was the smell of my childhood, of safety, of unconditional love. It was the smell of Grandma Agnes. The loaf was perfect. A A deep, burnished gold, the scores had opened into a beautiful, artistic ear. It sang as I took it out, the crust crackling softly as it cooled. I carried it on a simple wooden board to the front porch. I set it down on a small table I'd placed there, along with a serrated knife, a stack of paper bags, and a little jar for donations. I went back inside, leaving the front door open, and watched from the living room window. At 12:30 exactly, a car I didn't recognize slowed to a stop. A woman in nurse's scrubs got out, looking hesitant. She walked up the path, saw the loaf, and a slow smile spread across her face. She cut a thick slice, put it in a bag, and dropped a $5 bill in the jar. She looked towards the house, gave a small, grateful wave to the empty doorway, and left. Then another person came, an elderly man with a kind face. Then a young mother with a toddler on her hip. A college student on a bike. They came in a steady, quiet stream. They didn't talk to each other much. They just took their bread, some leaving money, some not, all with a look of quiet wonder, as if they'd stumbled upon a secret garden. They were the people from the forum. The lonely, the overlooked, the ones who understood what it meant to be a black sheep. They were taking a piece of my rebellion, my healing, and making it their own. The loaf dwindled to a heel. The jar held a surprising amount of cash and a few heartfelt notes. I watched, my hand pressed to my mouth, tears of profound connection welling in my eyes. This was more than bread. This was a conversation. This was a community. As the last person left, I stepped onto the porch to retrieve the board. The street was quiet again, but the air was different. It was charged with the aftermath of something meaningful. I looked down at the empty board, dusted with flour and crumbs. The first loaf was gone, but in its place, something immense had begun to rise. My family had excluded me from their dinner to maintain their perfect facade. In response, I had thrown open the doors and fed the town. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning. The scent of baking bread, once banished to the attic, now hung over our prestigious address, a silent, delicious revolution. The silence after the last bread seeker left was profound, broken only by the cheerful chirping of sparrows in the magnolia tree. I stood on the porch, the empty wooden board in my hands, feeling the lingering warmth from the loaf that was now gone, dispersed into the town, into other lives. The donation jar was heavy with coins and crumpled bills, a tangible weight of gratitude that felt infinitely more valuable than any trust fund. I carried it all inside, the scent of yeast and accomplishment clinging to my clothes. The house felt different. It was no longer just my family's museum. It was now the site of the Black Sheep Bakery. The pristine, intimidating facade had been breached by a stream of ordinary people, and their quiet reverence had sanctified the space in a way no society event ever could. I spent the afternoon in a blissful haze of flour and planning. The forum was exploding. The picture of that first, perfect loaf, alongside the story of the quiet porchside giveaway, had struck a chord deeper than I ever imagined. My inbox was flooded with messages, not just notes of thanks, but offers. Midnight Baker, whose real name was Sarah, sent a detailed list of her favorite cookie recipes and an offer to help with baking. Retired teacher Tom offered to build a little free library-style box for the porch to make the bakery permanent, rain or shine. A local farmer, who went by Green Thumb Gus, messaged to say he'd drop off a crate of surplus zucchini and tomatoes from his harvest. No one should have to pay for good food, he wrote. This was no longer just my solitary act of defiance. It was becoming a movement. A collective, gentle uprising against exclusion, against loneliness, against the high cost of both groceries and dignity. I was weighing the merits of sourdough versus a whole wheat multigrain for the next day when I heard my mother's car in the driveway. The familiar tension snapped back into my shoulders, but it was muted now, overshadowed by the new certainty I carried. She entered through the kitchen door, her entrance perfectly timed to catch me mid-flour dusting. She stopped short, her sharp eyes taking in the bag of flour on the counter, the bubbling starter, the dirty mixing bowls in the sink. Her nostrils flared. "What is that smell, Ilara? It's permeated the entire downstairs." Her voice was cold, a scalpel looking for a place to cut. "It's called bread, Mother," I said, not looking up from the recipe I was reading. You might remember it, a staple food for most of humanity. Don't be clever, she snapped. She placed her purse on the counter, then noticed the donation jar. She picked it up, the coins clinking. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. And what is this? You're running a charity case out of my kitchen. It's not a charity case, it's a bakery, a pay-what-you-can bakery, and it's not your kitchen right now, it's mine. I met her gaze, and for the first time I didn't flinch. She stared at me, a slow, dawning horror on her face as the implications sank in. The people on the porch, the forum post. It wasn't a one-time tantrum. It was an enterprise. You invited strangers onto our property, to our home, without permission. Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper. Do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't just some bohemian phase, Alara. This is our reputation, our standing. People talk. Yes, I said calmly, wiping my hands on a towel. They do, and they're talking about the bread. They're talking about kindness. It's a different kind of conversation than the one you usually curate, but it's happening.